too, in Dürer's Watercolor of Trent, from the glowing years before 1500, the youthful genius on his way to Venice reached a point beyond which realism, as the harmonious filling in of Gothic perception, could go no further. Here, too, what the future held was struggle, space buckling into vortices through a century of religious wars, persecutions and incursions of tragic darkness. And already the new mastery was enforcing the eschatology of judgment. That is the dialectic of Reformation and Counter-Reformation, individuality and reason in Luther stirring the eddy of Pentecostal identification. Strange that the strongest reality of 1500 should be the flaming recesses of Hieronymus Bosch's hell pockets. Now the liberation of the human and secular musters militant powers under the great seal of righteousness. Gone forever the olive-eyed Gothic distance. From the Catholic humanist Dürer of 1500 to this Protestant Dürer of 1526, there is a build-up of assertive volume, as if, as in the polyphonies of Stolzer, whole new registers had been added to consciousness. No less in Altdorfer's 1529 Battle of Alexander, the Magellanic rondure of the curved earth wheeling under the sun and moon as the empire of Persia falls. Even the sign against the heraldry of the Minnesinger manuscript hangs with fluttering drapes in real space from the picture frame. In fact, Copernicus had already revolutionized that astronomical space and been encouraged by two popes in the clarion decades of discovery before the Counter-Reformation put the jinx on his delayed revolutions. Stretched in the field of titanic humanism and penitential reform, the Renaissance rises to its first great tensile infolding. And as always, the mightiest spirit most kindles to the fervor makes it most his own. In the radiance that Florence spread over Italy and to Rome, no spirit was as fiercely strung to resonance as Michelangelo. It is he who most deepens human possibility. In the face of his Brutus, 1543, Shakespearean tragedy first becomes conceivable, the infinite pathos and transcendence of the flawed will. Past the midpoint of a century of tragic storm, artist after artist runs the course from early works harmoniously auspicious to deeper immersion in the enchafed flood. Here Bruegel's last picture on the proverb of the barrel and the hell-mouth whale, a desperately weathered sea sorrow to become a prevalent theme in Shakespeare. In Italy after 1550, there is a shift from the tensile, as in Michelangelo, to the kinetic, its musical crest in Giovanni Gabriele. With this early Tintoretto, the always increasing pride of person exhibits itself as an opulence of electric fire, flashing in the also increasing and pervading world dark. Tintoretto's later works, from the time of Giordano Bruno's Infinite Universe, pushed toward its climax the explosive vision, which by 1610 would stretch the frame and logos of every art almost to breaking. Nature a discharge of phosphorescence, the wind-heaped water under a sky of rage. It is in El Greco that the doomsday seizure of the magnified Renaissance earth reaches a crux of visionary inturning. In the Toledo landscape, as in King Lear, 1605-6, you cannot thrust a bodkin point between the real and symbolic universe. You cataracts and hurricanos spout till you have drenched our steeples, drowned the copse. At the same time, form and face undergo a tragic dissolution, as if all human glory and nothingness had met. In the face of the priest, in El Greco's Marriage of the Virgin, Lear's pride. Of all these bounds, even from this line to this, we make thee lady. And crushed humility, pray you now, forget and forgive. I am old and foolish. Merge in a stateliness, pieced out of shreds and tatters, a brushwork like straw, tossed on a cyclonic wind. Yet the kinetic spirals of mannerism were exactly the crucible in which the tactile and volitional formulations of Baroque were being explored. No sooner is 1600 past than from Italy northward, here Caravaggio, the expanding world, as in the chromatics of Swaling, coagulates into the rhetoric and histrionics of reasoned command, though a reason like Galileo's, schooled by brute fact and tenebrous pain. So too in Rubens, 1625, when the limitless storm spills over, it is into a century of Cartesian method. A critical point has been passed, like that between Shakespeare and Ben Jonson. In the dynamism of release, the energies, rational or emotional, have precipitated from the realized apocalypse to the apocalyptic real. From the equivocal might and exploratory transhumanity which make Lear unfathomable, Person by early Rembrandt, 1629, gathers itself into a philosophically validated, space-investing will. A power like Spinoza's divinity, extension is an attribute of God, or God is an extended thing. And it is by the formulable soul of light that this Miltonic introspection presents itself in the glory of spatial bondage, a reasoned justification of the ways of God to man, destinate as Pachelbel's canon Passacaglia. So too with the Rembrandt landscape of chiaro-scuro realism. By the heroics of sun through cloud, nature is subsumed under a divine syntax, as tensely fought for as the somber affirmations of Milton, while the realism affirms of all that ordering light. It is here and now, these fields, that bridge with the boatman passing under, As Spinoza says, particular things are nothing else than modifications of attributes of God, and reality and perfection I understand to be one and the same. The most impassioned Baroque assertion has an aspect of reasoned mastery, even in Pascal, where Cartesian reason undercuts itself. But in the great souls of the mid-century, hear Velasquez, it is just some Pascalian affinity which saves the art assertion from flagrant pride, a continuing antinomy of the poignance of space and the pathos of reason. The classical landscape peaks in Claude, here Assis and Galatea of 1657, with Polyphemus on the promontory beyond the bay. Yet that heroic world, like Prospero's cloud-capped towers, is visibly melting into light. Hail, holy light, offspring of heaven, firstborn. That which is overpushed recoils. It is in the French court of Louis XIV that the Baroque assertion swells to a point from which it could only break to the ridiculous. And it was only Rome that could offer in Bernini the virtuoso brilliance to boost the king image to an all-time sublime without letting it slip. Though we measure the risk by the secular arrogation of the old religious ground, l'État, c'est moi. By 1700, that heroic inflation, Dryden's aloft in awful state, the godlike hero sate on his imperial throne, is about to yield to popes. Hear thou, great Anna, whom 3 realms obey, dost sometimes counsel take, and sometimes take. Thus the Baroque yields to Couperin, thus Nello's Matthew Prior, even in the robes and pose of the vaunt, turns the flourishes of expression and light into Swiftian mockery. The bubble of virtu breaks in a witty play of artifice. The ironies of reason hide a growing sentiment of nature. It is the 18th century polarity, mocking mind, searching heart. In Watteau's Island of Love, those landscape depths of the Baroque become a precious filigree, stage set for the masque of manners, which is at once a courtly game and a sigh for joy. Pope, but now secure the painted vessel glides, the sunbeams trembling on the floating tides, while melting music steals upon the sky, and softened sounds along the waters die. Smooth flow the waves, the zephyrs gently play. Belinda smiled, and all the world was gay. The artifice of landscape, espaliered into park, seems fulfilled in Boucher's 1746 fishing scene, an arabesque of trees, clouds, and stream. Yet through that China veil, the cult of Rousseau begins to touch everything with dream. So Marie Antoinette played at shepherdess in her village in the Petit Trianon. The drive to forthright nature spurns that. England, Richard Wilson, most of all his revolutionary Kada Idris of 1774. But it is not the dimensional world reaffirmed. Light streaming space is stripped to the stark phenomenal. Man seems dwarfed, an exile. What begins to be verified is the Wordsworthian relation to the souls of lonely places, Haydn's muted horns. The mid-century rift between genteel convention and the natural man of heart is nowhere stronger than in Germany. The foppery of Renaissance humanitas, undercut by 2 centuries of aristocratic appropriation, could hardly show a prettier mask than in the Munich Duke of Zweibrücken. While the young artist Mengs, sketching himself about 1750, reminds us that Rousseau's intuition held the seeds both of revolution and romantic. The social contract, man is born free and is everywhere in chains. And the confessions, the austere Jean-Jacques, serious citizen of Geneva, became again the lovesick shepherd, and seeing nothing in existence worthy of my enthusiasm, I sought nourishment for it in an ideal world. Like the same person reborn stronger, Runge steps from the 18th century drawing room onto the Goethean world stage of 1803. Gefühl ist alles. Feeling is everything. Man's proclamation of grandeur had crested once in the rational hubris of the Baroque. After a century of irony and enlightenment, it rallies under revolutionary command. The Faust to claim in Beethoven, Hegel, Hölderlin, that world spirit is realizing itself through the shaping passions of the heart and will. It is the final liberation of the ego as a phenomenon of hope. The central urge of the Christian West had been to bring the kingdom of God from the timeless and spaceless to the here and now. The free and transcendental self requires a free and pantheistic nature, untamed, shoreless as God. Koch tried what romantics would pursue in the mountain fastnesses of the world, while Wordsworth, climbing Snowdon at night, saw in a sea of mist under the moon a blue chasm, a fracture in the vapor, a deep and gloomy breathing place through which mounted the roar of waters, torrents, streams. In that breach through which the homeless voice of waters rose, that dark, deep thoroughfare, had nature lodged the soul, the imagination of the whole. Nothing takes us deeper into the night brooding of early romantic than the face of Caspar David Friedrich, German landscape mystic of 1810. Thrown back like Beethoven in the late quartets from revolutionary hope, soul turns its introspective retreat into a triumph of inwardness. As Friedrich wrote under increasing neglect, and so I spin myself into a cocoon, and shall let time decide what will emerge therefrom. So Schelling's process of creation, the revelation of light in what was originally the principle of darkness, that principle which rises up from the depths of nature and by which man is divided from God, is the selfhood in him. But by reason of its unity with the ideal, this becomes spirit. Against the landscape of ordered harmony, the 18th century lord of the manor secured in the Lockean propriety of fruitful ground, Friedrich abandons ownership altogether. Earth and all begin to eclipse like the moon into figments. As in Goethe's Walpurgis Night, we have gone into the spheres of dream and magic. In die Traum- und Zauberschwere sind wir, scheint es, eingegangen. How variously landscape now veers back to the visionary, abstract, revelational. In Spain, Goya's 1820 fantastic vision from the Quinta del Sordo launches the older techniques of crisis, 1600 El Greco, 1700 Magnasco, toward the modern. hand of this Samuel Palmer, Blake was the total revolutionary, for whom the outward universe is the vegetative husk of symbolic reality. But landscape as such was more cultivated by the disciple in those Shoreham pictures of 1826 to 30, time of Schubert, when Palmer's youth was marvelously possessed by Blakean imagination. While Turner, starting in the traditional manner of the Dutch and Claude, threw all his academic skills into a program not unrelated to Blake's, though their techniques were opposite, an ecstatic transformation of matter into light. Thus one of his last pictures, Light and Color, Goethe's theory, the morning after the deluge, Moses writing the book of Genesis, exhibited in 1843. Not that Napoleonic assertion was a thing of the past. The 19th century is dominated by the sort of titanism we have called the liberation of the ego, but shifting from its 1790 enlightened base, a phenomenon of hope, to a Berlioz gallows march, a phenomenon of despair. This 1826 Delacroix portrait has absorbed Faust's satanic compact, with Byron's pageant of the bleeding heart. Rousseau's pain has eroded his natural good. One begins to wonder how far the human boast is suicidal. 20 years more and we come to a face inescapable in such a survey. The Courbet self paired in cycles with Flaubert on world sickness and a coming dark age. But the ennui and spleen of Baudelaire equally apply, when with eyes closed as in an opium dream, and I am a burial ground the moon abhors, je suis un cimetière abhorré de la lune. It is the mood Dowson brought to England, desolate and sick of an old passion, and for which Arnold, in his purer way, had written a Fall of the West program. The sea of faith was once too at the full, but now I only hear its melancholy, long, withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Landscape takes up the Dover Beach burden. Berkelin suffuses each rock, wave, and cypress with Tristan and Isolde lushness of Sehnsucht, as in the phrase Eliot calls for the wasteland, Earth und Leer das Meer, or elsewhere from Nerval, J'ai rêvé dans le grotte où nage la sirène. Here the art problem of the century becomes inescapable. Blake and even Goya had challenged the outward order. With bourgeois consolidation, realism also regrouped itself, as if to affirm our place in the dimensional. But its message is the reverse, is Rilke's, that we are not very much at home in the interpreted world. So how long can the techniques caress that world with the oily touch of Baudelaire, Wagner, and Berkelin? The soul is almost at cleavage, raised as Yeats saw Nietzsche, from the romantic Gaia toward another, where rocky face laughs in tragic joy. And in Hans von Mares' portrait of himself and Lenbach, 1863, Nietzschean violence turns to idiot laughter. to offer up God to the void. That is the last mystery, the sacrament of terror reserved for the generation at hand. We have already felt it working in ourselves. From that bituminous immersion, Impressionism, by a shift of attention from the self to the science of light and air, drew Monet and the rest from the visceral wake of Wagner and Zarathustra into the plain air of Argenteuil and Provence, the rainbow of broken color, like a Fauré scherzo, an art of delight. Of which, however, two things must be said: that the strains of yearning distill through the brightness, and that, as we have implied with modern science, reality itself, the landscape, begins to dissolve under the analytical shimmer. Thus Renoir's 1876 portrait of Monsieur Choquet slips quietly beyond Maret's confidence man's smile. What the palette clothes in wistful gaiety is man's withdrawal from the temporal field, as in Verlaine, ils n'ont pas l'air de croire à leur bonheur, et leurs chansons se mêlent au clair de lune. They have the air of not believing in their own happiness, and their song is mingled with the light of the moon, while Fauré yields to Debussy. Anyone who thought the spiritual hunger solved by picnic outings along the Impressionist Seine would be troubled by the case of Van Gogh, which is not a private case, though all lives have that dimension. From the den of the potato eaters, he took the release of broken color and went south, risking the manic lark from the corn, to plunge with his brighter plumage into despair. As Hopkins, the same years,